I have never supported the use of military force, of U.S. military force in this conflict, and I still don't. I believe that U.S. military action of the type contemplated here may prove to be counterproductive. After a few days of missile strikes, it will allow Assad, for example, to emerge and claim that he took on the United States and survived. And by the way, I also think this action could unleash a series of events that could further destabilize the region.
Senator Marco Rubio back in 2013 warning against what he called pinprick military strikes against Bashar Assad in Syria. He's joining us now this morning. Senator Rubio, thank you for joining us this morning. That was back in 2013. You praised President Trump's strike this week as a first step in a longer strategy. But are you worried, based on what we're seeing from Assad this morning, the airfield up and running again, his defiance, that the consequences you feared back in 2013 are coming true now?
Well, first of all, the consequences actually happened, and I would say that 3.5 years is a long time. Here's a lot of things that have changed. Here's the first thing that's changed from 2013 to now. The Russians are now there. Assad was losing back in 2013. If we had armed non-jihadist elements on the ground, they could have overthrown him. That's what I thought was the better approach at the time. The second is that the administration, what they were proposing, had no clear objective. They wanted to blow up some things to send a message. I don't think you use the U.S. military simply to send a message. This strike was limited, but it had a clear strategic objective, which was the destruction or the degrading of a key air-base installation that is used in these chemical attacks. That said, look, I listened to the interview earlier today, I guess, that Secretary Tillerson is going to have on your program, and I'm a bit concerned about the outlines of the strategy as I understand it. I think it's based on assumptions that, quite frankly, are not the right ones, and I hope they'll reconsider this idea that we're going to get rid of ISIS and then we'll hopefully use Assad and others to come up with a solution. It's not going to work. As long as Assad is there, you're going to have a radical jihadist Sunni element. Even if you destroy ISIS, it'll be al-Nusra and that new coalition. These people who have been killed and gassed and human rights violations against them will never accept Assad as a rightful ruler, and they will join or become radicalized in order to fight him.
So what should they be doing instead?
Well, here's the first thing I would tell you is we have, and I agree with you, there has to be a strategy outlined that is based on reality. This is not Libya. I also heard that he kind of analogized it to Libya. The Libyan situation, Gaddafi was overthrown by his people. What happened afterwards, the lack of a strategic plan or engagement by the international community after Gaddafi's removal, is what's led to the chaos that we see in Libya today. On the case of Syria today, it's much more complicated than it was 3, 4, 5 years ago, but there are still things that can be done. We should be increasing sanctions significantly on Iranian and Russian interests that are helping Assad. In particular, this Boeing deal should be canceled. The second thing that we need to examine is how can we suppress the air defenses of the Assad regime? And that may include coalition use of force to ensure that these offensive operations from the air are not happening. And by the way, keep our troops safe.
But you can't do that if Russia's not on board, can you?
What's that? I'm sorry?
You can't do that if Russia's not on board, can you?
Well, listen, here's the bottom line. If those airstrikes are being used not just to attack civilians and innocents on the ground, but also threatening the over 500 American servicemen and women who are on the ground in Syria, we have a national security interest in protecting them from airstrikes. By the way, that was one of the factors I think should have been in play in this particular attack. The presence of sarin gas and its use in a country where there are Americans embedded alongside forces working to defeat ISIS is a clear and present danger to the men and women who serve us in uniform. I also think we need to rebuild and reinvigorate the non-jihadist elements on the ground. It is going to be harder than it was 3 or 4 years ago, but I still think possible to identify elements on the ground that are not jihadists who we can help to become players both on the negotiating table and in southeastern and southern Syria, to be major players in the future of Syria as an alternative to Assad.
You know, when we talked on Friday, you suggested you thought the administration was moving in the direction you're outlining right now. After listening to Secretary of State Tillerson this morning, do you still believe that?
Well, I'm concerned, and there seems to be a difference between what Ambassador Haley is saying, as she said last night, that Assad really has no future, and what I heard this morning from Secretary Tillerson. But look, I don't mean to pick a fight with anyone here. What I'm telling you is I think that the strategy he seems to be outlining is based on assumptions that aren't going to work. There is no such thing as Assad, yes, but ISIS, no. This focus that you can defeat ISIS as long as Assad is there is not true. They are two sides of the same coin. As long as Bashar al-Assad is in power in Syria, you will have a reason for people to be radicalized in Syria. And that's what's going to happen. And by the way, in all this talk about ISIS, there's an al-Qaeda group that is growing in strength this al-Nusra coalition, that are prepared to step into the vacuum left behind by a defeated ISIS. You cannot have a stable Syria without jihadist elements on the ground as long as Bashar al-Assad is in power. And the quicker they realize that, the better our strategy is going to be. But this idea that somehow you can just defeat ISIS and then we'll figure it out with Assad, it's not going to work.
On the subject of Mexico, you heard Secretary Tillerson there say he didn't even bring it up, Mexico paying for the wall, when he met with the Mexican foreign minister this week. It seems like that idea of Mexico paying for the wall is dying a slow death.
Well, we met with a foreign minister as well, and it did come up in our meeting. And let me just say, Mexico's not going to pay for the wall. And by the way, America should, if we believe that's in our national interest to do so. But I do think there's a lot we can work on with Mexico. I think the Mexican government is open, for example, to renegotiating key points in NAFTA on intellectual property as an example. I think they have a real interest in their border security, in their southern border. I think Mexico's willing to be a partner in El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, the Northern Triangle countries that are a source of a lot of the migration that's coming in through Mexico. Mexico is as much a transit point now as it is a source of origin for people coming into the United States. I think there's a lot of military-to-military engagement with Mexico. There's a lot we can work on together. I left that meeting feeling pretty positive about what we can do with our relationship, and I hope that's the direction it continues.
Finally, you're also a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee. President Trump told the New York Times this week that he thinks that Susan Rice, President Obama's national security advisor, may have committed a crime. He offered no evidence for this at all, but may have committed a crime as she was reviewing those intelligence files that had dealt with the Trump transition. As I said, you're a member of the Intelligence Committee. Have you seen any evidence at all to back up a claim like that?
Well, I usually try not to opine on those issues. Suffice it to say that I have not seen anything like it. But let me say this. I think we've learned over the last couple weeks how bad it is to kind of be talking and debating these things in front of the media. If you're serious about a fact-finding mission, you wait until all the facts are in, you write them in a report, we make them public, and then you and members of the Senate and House, the American public, can look at those facts and decide where we should go from there. And that's what we're in the process of doing. I am very proud of the work the Intelligence Committee is doing in the Senate. It's bipartisan. Everyone's working hard. No one's out there trying to turn this into a way to get famous. And I think I'm more confident than ever that we're going to prepare a package. We're going to prepare a report that's going to lay out all the facts across a number of topics, and that will allow you and others to look at it, and from there draw conclusions about what should happen next and who was involved and who wasn't. And I just ask everyone for a little bit of patience. It's not going to be as fast as you want, but it's going to be done right. And I'm more confident today than I've ever been about that.
Senator Rubio, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks, George.